Welcome. Thank you. And well, let's start the second real international workshop on advances in competition policy. I would like to thank here in our opening welcome remark table Professor Fábio Freitas, the director of the Institute of Economics, Professor Yannis Katsoulakos, the CRESE coordinator, the co-organizer of this event, and Márcio Bueno, the president of IBRAC. IBRAC is one of the main sponsors and also represents the Association of Competition Practitioners in Brazil. Well, I will start with Professor Fábio.
Thank you, Eduardo. Dear Professor Katsoulakos, the CRESE coordinator, Mário Bueno, president of IBRAC, Professor Eduardo Pontual of the Institute of Economics, members of the audience. It is with great satisfaction that I welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Economics to the second Rio International Workshop on Advances in Competition Policy Analysis. The Institute of Economics is one of the leading economic research and teaching institutions in Brazil. We receive more than 200 students every year in our undergraduate courses. We have graduate programs with both master's and doctorate degrees in economics, public policy and development, and international political economy. Our faculty is organized in research groups as the GDEC, Research Group in Law, Economics, and Competition, that is organizing this workshop, jointly with CRESE. GDEC is taking a leading role in organizing and contributing to academic work in competition policy in Brazil. GDEC is building a solid national and international network of researchers and professionals from private and public institutions. The second Rio International Workshop on Advances in Competition Policy Analysis is one of the many international seminars that we co-organize, and I'm happy to see that the success of a very large attendance by the main researchers and practitioners in competition policy in Brazil and from other countries. I hope you have 2 days of intensive and productive discussions. Thank you very much.
Well, I would like just a quick thanks to Yannis, that is always having a leading role in organizing the workshops here in Brazil, and with the extremely important support from CRESE. And I also would like to particularly thank our invited speakers, Professor Martin Peitz, Professor Yannis, Cristina Cafara, and William Kovacic. And also, I would like to thank all of you that are here, our roundtable discussants, and the contributed paper authors and presenters and discussants. Without you, this workshop would not be possible, certainly. I would like also to take a couple of minutes to thank our sponsors, IBRAC, which was also enthusiastic from day one of having our second round of our biannual workshop, PEPED, PPGE, the 2 graduate programs here in Brazil, Tendências Consultants, and supporters Instituto Economia, the Fórum Ciência e Cultura, and Coptec. We're having distinguished scholars presenting papers and discussions, as well as agencies related to competition, such as CADE, ANP, Banco Central, ANS, and IPEA. I thank them for making possible the participation of their staff on their workshop, bridging academics and practitioners in the development of competition policy. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Many thanks for the collaboration and the congratulations to the team here, who has, in the first place in 2017, this year again have made a great job in organizing this very nice conference in competition. I should say a few words about CRESE in case there are people here that are not familiar with this organization. It's a very informal organization, actually. It's a network, essentially, of professionals working on competition policy, mainly academics, but also practitioners, policymakers are involved. It has its administrative base in Greece, but the scientific committee, the advisory board, the people that help us, like in this case, Martin Peitz, Bill Kovacic, Christina Kafara. So it's a very international endeavor that started in 2005. So we are on the 15th year of organizing an annual conference, a 3-day annual conference, which takes place in one of the big Greek islands, in recent years mainly in Crete. It will take place at the end of June in Crete of 2020. And we also organize a 2-week summer school, the lawyer's course, a course on advanced topics in competition policy. And since last year, we organize with OCD a course relating to the management of competition policy by competition authorities. A lot of the prominent people that are in the in the committee and in the board, CRESE associates are involved in those courses. Since 2014, it's already 5 years, we have responded to requests to co-organize events in other countries outside Greece. And so since then, we have been organizing every year a conference with the South African Competition Commission. This takes place every year at the end of August, beginning of September. Then every other year, we organize some lectures at the conference in China, in cooperation with various universities and in various cities. Next event will be in Nanchang and in Hong Kong in May. Every other year, we also organize a conference and lectures with FNE, the Chilean Competition Authority. And since 2018, every other year, 2017, every other year we have been organizing an event with Eduardo and the other team in IE-UFRJ, and I hope that we continue to do so in the future. So again, thanks a lot for the collaboration. Congratulations, Eduardo. Congratulations to all of you. And many thanks to Martin and Bill Kovacic and Christina Kafara for accepting to be part of this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Professor Eduardo, for the invitation on behalf of IBRAC to be part of this great workshop for the second time. One of our missions at IBRAC, which is the leading think tank in Brazil for competition policy and economy, is to promote the academic studies and reflections. And I'm pretty sure you, GEDEC, and also CRES has been developing a very good place to discuss not only what has been happening, but what will start to be happening and the discussions that we see in the future in competition policy. This is a very high-level event with academics coming from all over the world. So we are very proud. It's an honor for IBRAC to be a sponsor of this event. We are pretty sure that this will continue to grow as a tradition, not only in Brazil, but in the international calendar as well. So we, with these words, we just wish to congratulate you, Professor Yannis, and Director Fabio, and Camila, of course, for organizing such a great event and pushing this forward. We know this is a lot of work to coordinate everyone, and we are very happy that you have been leading this. We are also happy to be in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Another of our missions at IBRAC is to develop more and more the community here in Rio de Janeiro, and of course this helps a lot. Thank you.
Yes, special thanks to Camila.
Oh, well, thank you, everyone, and we shall move now for our invited lecture by Professor Martin, please.
Okay, so I'm very happy to be here. Welcome to this first lecture. Lecture means, well, I don't know what it means, but for me it means that I don't put up any formulas, so it's purely verbal. I'm an academic economist. Even worse, I try to do theory, but I don't tell the theorists. So I guess these are the people who don't have much of a clue. But I guess our advantage is that we are rather unbiased. Okay, so hopefully the lecture will deliver the somewhat unbiased view, but then I have strong opinions, but they haven't been purchased from anybody. So what I want to talk about is the attention economy, which has become quite a buzzword among policymakers, and I think also as academic economists we have something to contribute on that front. And I will first provide you with some view on what the attention economy is about. Then I will say a few words on market power issues. And then I will talk about abuse, distinguishing between exclusionary and exploitative abuse. And perhaps one thing you're missing here is merger control. Not that I think it's unimportant, rather the opposite, but hopefully we have the round table to discuss a bit more on merger. Okay, so first let me provide you with a few personal insights of the attention economy. But that's nothing new. There's a lot of marketing literature about attention. Advertisers try to attract the attention of potential consumers. But I think it's useful to be aware of two limitations these advertisers and for that matter, anybody who wants to raise the attention, that can be simple content providers, face. One is our time is limited, so we cannot spend time watching all television channels nowadays because there are simply too many. We cannot read all books which are written, so we have to select, and then we have those intermediaries who try to channel this intermediation, sometimes for our good, but sometimes also for the good of the intermediary, and the two may not coincide. And there's a second aspect of limited attention, which is not just the time we spend on viewing things, but it's also our ability to recall. And that's also limited, and that's relevant, for example, for the context of advertisers. They may be, in the first instance, rather happy that they have been showing an ad to you, but it might not be that you were paying much attention to it, and even if you were, you might not recall it, and therefore the whole purpose of this ad gets lost, and that applies to commercial advertising. That, of course, also applies to political advertising, and it also applies to content provision if that content provision is supposed to have effects on behavior. So I will distinguish between attention providers, that's typically the consumers like you and me, and attention seekers, which can be content providers, advertisers, and sometimes it's a gray zone that it's not clear where people are. Do we call them an advertiser? Do we call them a content provider? Now, the attention intermediary brings these groups together. It looks like there are two groups, but there may be more than two groups. For example, these can be a separate group of content providers and a group of advertisers who in some sense want to free ride on the attraction which is generated by content providers and put in a few ads on the side. And then the third group are we as consumers. What's the attention intermediary doing? Well, it's bringing those two together. There may be non-profit organizations doing that, and some of them there are, if you think about Wikipedia, for example. But most of those attention intermediaries we find in the digital world are for-profit, and they have different business models to make money, and sometimes combinations, and often combinations of those. So they may just directly monetize on us as consumers. Think about Netflix charging a subscription fee. It's gathering data in the process of attracting the attention. That data may be valuable, it may be sold to third parties, or it may be used in adjacent markets by the same attention intermediary. It's another way of paying is that to find a group of attention seekers who are willing to pay for the opportunity to get into contact with those attention providers. Okay. So here we have attention intermediaries. So many people would say clearly Facebook and YouTube belong to this group of attention intermediaries because many who have written about it have this advertising-financed model in mind, but that's just one option out of many. And if you look, these boundaries are not well defined. Take YouTube. YouTube bringing together content providers and content seekers, monetizing on a third side, which are advertisers who post their ads on YouTube. But that's the model how YouTube started to make money. Now you also have in many countries a subscription service provided by YouTube. So instead of then seeing the ads as a consumer, you can decide to take the subscription service, get advertising-free content. So you see these boundaries move, and some attention intermediaries combine different ways of making money. And I would include also Netflix and Spotify, and if you want, even League of Legends, where you have professional gamers and you have an audience watching those games. So that's clearly quite an attention intermediary, and perhaps you haven't spent many hours on that. I didn't either. But I know people who spend a lot of time on this attention intermediary. So what are the incentives for the attention seekers to be on such a platform? Oh, no, that doesn't work. Okay, so I do this. Who try to be on a platform? Well, so they are often non-monetary incentives. If you think about many of those intermediaries who started out, such as YouTube, this was non-professionals who were uploading stuff. They didn't receive any compensation initially from YouTube when they did it, just because they liked that others watched their content. And as often economists think that this is strange, well, I mean, that's a normal way of life, that we want to tell things about ourselves, things we have done. And that's one group of content providers who are attention seekers. Yeah, there are, of course, different ways of making money. I was mentioning the advertising part, so that you can obtain monetary payoffs in other markets. But if you also think about musicians uploading their stuff for free, especially the up-and-coming artists or those who think that they are up-and-coming, they do this as a promotional tool, so they don't get any direct benefit, but they hope to sell tickets, concert tickets on the side. So that's another incentive of those attention seekers. We also, of course, see now, if you look at YouTube, that those who upload their stuff, they get paid. They get paid by the impression. And so you have these influencers who are out on different platforms, and they have clearly monetary incentives to be there, and they are paid. Okay? The attention intermediaries, I already was alluding to that. They are monetizing in different ways, possibly in combinations. And an important element, which is somewhat hidden, which is always part of the digital attention economy, is the collection of data and the use of those data for multiple purposes. Of course, some purposes are just related to the way the attention intermediary operates. It needs the kind of data in order to provide a matching service, for example, so provide recommendations, for example. But these data can also be monetized, for example, in the advertising context, by providing very granular advertising opportunities, so have a very targeted audience which can be reached. So that's clearly a way why data are useful for attention intermediaries. These data can also be used sometimes in adjacent markets, either by the intermediary itself or by selling the data, or when it's personal data, they can't sell personal data in most jurisdictions. It's by offering services which make use of those data. Okay. So, as I mentioned, data are often useful to guide attention. Therefore, we cannot really separate the attention issue from the data issue. These collection of data and the interpretation of data generate what we call network effects. So where there's an advantage of those attention intermediaries who have become rather large relative to attention intermediaries who just start. And the way these data are immediately used by attention intermediaries is through recommender systems, but also through rating systems. And in some sense, for many of those intermediaries, that's the core business model, because without those systems, they wouldn't be offering something useful. It would be just a collection of all kind of mostly irrelevant stuff, and it's exactly the ability of the attention intermediary to match the content to the interests of the attention providers. Now, in the attention economy, there are some concerns. There's particularly the concern that consumers may be getting a bad deal. Perhaps not initially, so you scale up the model. Initially, the business model looks good for those consumers, but after a few years' time, there are problems which may occur to those users. Now, the kind of law which typically deals with that are consumer protection laws. And there has been a tendency in some jurisdictions that competition authorities have been willing to play a consumer protection authority even though they don't have the mandate. Now, is that necessarily the wrong way to go? Well, if you think some consumer protection agencies may be rather weak, they have don't have the same instruments available as competition authorities, so then there is possibly a path through competition authorities, but only if the suffering of the consumers is actually related to market power. Yeah? And we have many examples where we have, say, systematic behavioral biases, and it's rather difficult to establish a connection between exploiting those behavioral biases and market power. And I will return to that at the end of this. But it doesn't mean that I want to leave this slide. Thank you. There are issues about lack of information where consumer protection can play a role. If you think about security risks, it's very difficult for individuals to understand those security risks. So clearly, in those instances, we may use consumer protection. There is clearly fraudulent behavior in some of those platforms, and here consumer protection law provides instruments to deal with fraudulent behavior. Whether that's sufficient, that's a different issue, and that's very much discussed in some of the recent reports on digital platforms, so whether we need some regulatory authority which has an overlook over the sector and can intervene more rapidly. There's also sometimes an issue of protecting attention seekers. Most obvious when it's about IP-protected content, so copyrighted material. So there we have clearly IP law to protect those attention seekers. There's also an issue of unfair trade practices by some of those attention intermediaries. So there we have laws on fair trade practices which can be used. And finally, there's the issue, to what extent do we need sector regulation applied to digital platforms, and in particular to attention intermediaries. So one example here is the P2B, platform to business regulation in the European Union, which addresses some of those issues. So these are issues which are relevant even for small attention intermediaries when there is no market power issue. So there may be market power issues on the different sides. On the side of attention seekers, there may be multiple groups of those, and there can be market power issues on the attention provider side. And it's important, that's a key insight of platform economics, that we cannot just look at one side to establish whether there is market power on this side, but rather we have to take into account the so-called cross-group network effects, the fact that users on one side, their utility depends on the decisions of the users on the other side, and therefore, while it might look at the first glance that there is a market power issue on one side, this may disappear if we understand that on the other side there is intense competition. Yeah? So sometimes it means that where we are concerned about market power on one side, well, once we look at the whole system, the way the platform operates, this market power issue disappears, but also the reverse can actually happen. So one clear observation, one clear lesson from platform economics here applied to attention intermediaries: if we see prices being charged to the different groups, say attention providers and attention seekers, and or for example, if we provide as an attention intermediary some remuneration to attention seekers, which are content providers, and we cash in on the consumer side, and there's a big spread, so that may be seen as proof of market power. But what we're doing here already is we're putting the prices on the different, charged to the different groups into perspective. And that's very important, because if we just look at the price charged on one side, that has gives us very little information about the presence of market power. And a bit too quick. The second issue is that it's not useful to think about this attention intermediary of providing just some intermediation service. So that's something which has been discussed quite a bit in the law and economics literature. So there are some proponents of defining such markets. I'm a clear opponent to that view. I think it's not helpful at all. It invites for wrong decisions made by competition authorities. So it is important to understand that this attention intermediary provides a service to possibly different groups of attention seekers and a separate intermediation service to the group of attention providers. Okay? And competition on those sides may look very different. For example, if we have one attention intermediary who has a subscription-based model and another attention intermediary who has an advertising-financed model, where those attention intermediaries compete for for consumers who are attention providers, but in the advertising space, one of those intermediaries is not present at all, and it's only one of those then who is present in that market. Now, the concern in those markets, so there's one concern which is the so-called tipping, that one attention intermediary for a certain type of services will come to dominate that market. So this kind of tipping is of little concern if the competition then turns out to be a competition for the market, so that this attention intermediary is easily replaced by another attention intermediary in case that this competitor provides superior service. So then we are replacing essentially competition in the market by competition for the market. However, the big risk is that market positions become entrenched, and that's in particular the case if data collected in the past provide advantages, for example, because those data are still valuable in the present, or even if they're no longer valuable, they have been absorbed in a sense by the algorithm. The algorithm has been trained on past data, and therefore such an attention intermediary is better able to provide good recommendations to us as consumers, for example. So forces which may lead to entrenched market positions are positive network effects. They may be within groups, so on one side only. They may be mutual across groups, so from one to the other and back. There are issues of consumer lock-in and the resulting switching costs. And there's also an issue which is, I think, now very much voiced in the policy debate, but in terms of the economic mechanisms behind, we still have to work on that, is to worry about dominance in adjacent markets, so that we get these kind of big ecosystems where one player is dominating that ecosystem, and consumers essentially opt into such an ecosystem and then consume multiple services provided. Yeah? There's the Apple ecosystem, there's the Google ecosystem, and possibly there are a few others. So merger policy is important. I'm not going to talk about it here. I do have some very strong views on that, but that's for another occasion. I want to talk a little bit about abuse, and what we are seeing are cases with exclusionary abuse and exploitative abuse, and some cases have both elements. So let's start a little bit with exclusionary abuse. So there are a number of issues, and in a single case, multiple of those issues may appear. They are horizontal issues, so that an attention intermediary essentially increases barriers to entry, therefore makes entry of competing attention intermediaries less likely. That may be on the merit, but of course it may be also maybe an abuse. And one example are contractual restrictions, which can be seen as such an abuse, even though in the case of credit cards, which are not strictly speaking perhaps attention intermediaries, but clearly they are two-sided platforms, the Supreme Court of the United States apparently didn't see it, but that doesn't mean that economists don't see it. I guess the vast majority of economists is on the other side. It's not siding with the Supreme Court, but has developed the view that in this context, at least contractual restrictions such as no steering, in the context of credit cards, it means that shops are not allowed to tell consumers if they don't mind to use a particular card instead of another one, simply because the fees are lower. So that these contractual restrictions are indeed an abuse, and they constitute they make entry more difficult of other platforms and may even lead to exit. There are vertical issues, so that you can use as an attention intermediary the market power you have gained in order to gain an advantage in a vertical way. We see a lot of partial vertical integration among digital platforms, including attention intermediaries, seeing that, for example, Netflix is producing its own content, Amazon is moving into content production for Amazon Prime. mostly. And we have other examples where there are elements of partial vertical integration. There is the issue. I'm not saying the fact that there is partial vertical integration constitutes an abuse, but whenever we observe it, we have to worry about abuse so that it's exclusionary abuse in a vertical sense. Okay? And there are also possibly conglomerate issues. One example is exclusionary bundling. So we have adjacent markets and an attention intermediary or some other platform, which we may not want to label as attention intermediary, has the ability and the interest to enter into a rather competitive market with a bundled product, and it may be, so there exist theories of harm developed by economists which show that such bundling can be anti-competitive, and that's then a conglomerate issue, which does not mean that whenever we observe bundling that this is for anti-competitive reasons. There exist pro-competitive arguments as well, so it depends very much on the case whether we view such a practice as being anti-competitive. And the last point I want to make is about exploitative abuse, which often is something much more complicated. We are recently seeing more exploitative abuse cases in the context of digital platforms, and I want to make a few comments on those. So often, as economists, we have a much harder time to say what is exploitative abuse if we just have price, we observe prices. Why? Well, take the extreme case of a monopolist. A monopolist doesn't want to charge a higher price than the monopoly price, right? To the extent that there is no abuse, at least European competition law says, well, that a market power, strong market position which has been acquired with legal means, well, such a firm then has the right to use that market power in form of high prices. In the extreme case, if on the merit a firm has acquired monopoly power, it can charge a monopoly price, and in that case we shouldn't have any exploitative abuse because the monopolist doesn't want to charge a higher price than the monopoly price. Okay? Now, so that's a general issue, and I think in the platform context we have additional issues, so that applies then to attention intermediaries, namely that we have multi-sidedness, so we don't even have clear benchmarks. So if we think about in an oligopoly context, for example, we do have in the standard theory, and that can then be applied, we have some competitive benchmarks. It's much harder to understand what those competitive benchmarks are or could be in a platform context. First, if competition is very intense, well, this competition may simply not be viable in a platform context, so therefore there is no such construct as a competitive benchmark. If we allow for some more relaxed competition, we can construct such a competitive benchmark, but the properties of this competitive benchmark are very different from things we are typically used to see, namely that we would say that a rather competitive outcome is one where prices are close to marginal cost. Well, that does not necessarily apply in such a platform context. And there's another issue that we observe, that many of the services are provided for free to at least one side, and for initial businesses even to multiple sides. And then the question is, can there be an abuse when actually people get a service for free? Is there a non-price abuse? And in principle it's possible, but it's clearly rather difficult to establish. Now, if we observe a certain practice and worry about whether consumers are harmed, we have to take a stance here. Who are the consumers? And as soon as there are multiple sides, things are much more complicated. And if I look at a number of European authorities, over the years, it seems that they are struggling with that because it depends a little bit on the case. In one case, they are worried about the advertisers. In another case, they are worried about the consumers. And sometimes that's fine if you just worry about one group because those interests may be aligned, but in other instances, they are misaligned. And in that case, you really have to take a stance on how to combine those surpluses. And what you also probably want to do, for example, if you see effects on the advertiser side, but take a consumer surplus standard where you care about us as final consumers, you should worry about pass-through. So you have to include the pricing decisions and possibly also some non-price decisions by users of the attention intermediary, which in this case are advertisers. Oh, sorry. Now, there's some group of practices where there's at least an economic theory of harm, where we see there can be exploitation. One example are the price parity clauses used in a number of different settings, including hotel booking. So there is a clear theory of harm based on exploitative abuse. So one of those theories have been very prominently published, but there are a few other different channels how to construct exploitative abuse. One warning here is that this is not necessarily linked to a dominant market position. So actually, the use of those contractual restrictions, the negative impact on consumers is more severe if we are in an environment with several platforms, with several attention intermediaries. There is harm also in the monopoly context, but this harm is more severe in the case when there are multiple ones. So that means we may then have to go for collective dominance arguments, not just dominance of a single player. Let me provide you with two examples from the which have been dealt with not just in Germany, but also in Germany, and it's moving up the courts. Well, here it's now actually moving down the courts again. Ad blockers are a very interesting example of attention intermediaries. So first of all, they are great for consumers, because you get the content. You don't have to watch advertising, which is annoying. It's either completely blocked out, or at least certain types of advertising is blocked out. So overall, you have less advertising exposure. And if you're using a smartphone, you also be happy because your pages will be loading more quickly. Because what you don't perhaps know is that quite a large chunk of those data which are transmitted for the web page to work are actually related to advertising. Okay, so here's a quote. So it's not the official one because the German courts don't publish things in English. So here's my translation of it. The defendant, so that's the ad blocker, acts as an intermediary between the website operators and the users. The special nature of its position vis-à-vis other intermediaries results from the fact that it offers the site operators the exclusive removal of an obstacle to access which it has created itself. So that's the funny business model of the ad blockers, and there have been court cases talking about unfair trade practices, saying that's an unfair trade practice, and at least in Germany, the companies suing, so these are particular digital publishers, they lost. Okay, the courts, both the higher court and also now the highest court, decided that it's not an unfair trade practice. Well, because there are clear consumer benefits involved. It's not just running an extortion racket. There is some real value provided to consumers. Okay, and interestingly, the higher court said that it's not an unfair trade practice, and it's also not an abuse from a competition perspective. So therefore, from the point of view of the higher court, things were very much settled. But this publisher sued at the highest court, and interestingly now the highest court said, well, it's confirmed that it's not an unfair trade practice, but it may constitute an abuse of market power. Okay? And the concern here is one about exploitation of attention seekers and attention providers, meaning us as consumers, may also be affected, but only through pass-through effects, which would need to be explored. Okay? And the second case I want to mention, which has been extremely prominent and it's still ongoing, so therefore it's a bit early to draw conclusions, but at least we can see of what it's about, is the Facebook case in Germany, where the German, so that's currently at the higher court. There's been some preliminary ruling, some interim finding, but the court case is still ongoing. So the German competition authority, the Bundeskartellamt, said two things. Well, first it said that Facebook violates GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation. So it's engaging in illegal behavior. So first observation. And the higher court doesn't take a position where that's correct, but it just says, okay, that's the assumption of the authority. Secondly, Facebook is deemed to be dominant, and in the market, how it's defined by the cartel office, that for most people is probably also unproblematic. And from that, the German cartel office concluded, well, with some additional pages, that this then constitute exploitative abuse. And the higher court rejected that. So the higher court says in this interim finding that, well, there hasn't been provided any link between the illegal behavior and the dominant position. And that's what is required. So here's some quotes in that line from the higher court, which I think are very interesting lessons. Of course, they only apply directly to Germany, but they're very much received. There are many recipients all across Europe, and what is happening in Europe, then also other authorities are looking to it. So here's what the higher court says. The necessary causal link between Facebook's dominant market position, confirmed by the German cartel office and not questioned, and the breach of data protection law, assumed by the office, cannot be established. It is not the aim of abuse control to prosecute any violations of the law without a competitive connection under antitrust law. Against this background, a causal relationship between the market power of the dominant undertaking and its abusive conduct, or at least the anti-competitive effects of its conduct, is absolutely necessary. The German higher court is not known to encourage economists to develop theories of harm. This is a fantastic quote which tells us that we as economists, academic economists, but also practitioners, are asked to provide, in cases such as the Facebook case, for such a link between illegal behavior, or at least behavior which is seen problematic, and the dominant market position. And I want to leave it with this. I do have some ideas on how such a theory of harm looks like. I'm talking to the German cartel office, and let's see how the further proceedings will go in the Facebook case. What I wanted to say is that in some sense I find it very nice to have those two cases taken from the same jurisdiction. In one case, there is some illegal behavior, there is market power, but that doesn't necessarily constitute abuse. And the other case, the behavior is seen as not illegal. They are based on the fair trade rules in the case of ad blockers, but still it may constitute a violation of antitrust rules in the context of exploitative abuse. So that means there is not really a one-to-one substitution between using other parts of law and using exploitative abuse, and that means we are likely to see further exploitative abuse cases in the future. And that's all I want to say here. Thank you very much.